What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another Sunday Scan. We're going to do a little bit different of a format this week where I'm going to bring on a guest later on in the show, and I'm going to bring on Judah this week to go over some of our main watches together. But for the first half of the show, I really want to go over a lot of names that were in play over the last week. Part of the reason why we do this scan is to make sure that people are able to generate ideas. They're able to see what's moving in the market, and whether they've been out for a week, they can get caught up, or if they've been here for the week, they can be more prepared for the week ahead. So the first half of Scan will be going over the names that were most in play, some notable news. We'll just run through a bunch of charts. I'll talk about them for a few minutes, and then we'll get on to the t-shirt winners, and then we'll move on to the main section with watches for the week with Judah. So starting us off, last week we talked about several names that were really in play and on watch. And one of those for me was MARA, Mara, which is a Bitcoin miner. And the thought process last week was that with Bitcoin kind of ticking back up with the market in general, that Mara could have a nice move along with that. And so I think it had a good move from about that 17 mark or so from last week, ran up to about 21. And there was definitely some good opportunity there. Part of the reason why I like names like this is that they have range, they trend well, and they can be anchored to something. And so what I mean by anchored is that it trades very closely with Bitcoin day to day. And so, not all the time and not over all stretches, but if Bitcoin's having a sharp move up during a day, then there's a good chance that Mara could be going with it. And it's the same with some other names like CLSK or Riot or some of the other Bitcoin names. So we had some good opportunities on the long side with Mara this week as Bitcoin ramped. And then on the backside, they actually had earnings later on in the week, and so did CLSK. And they started to really break that uptrend and head back into a downtrend. And so really, whether you were a long bias trader, a short bias trader, equity options, you could have had some really good opportunities with a name like this. So that was a great one to see. Another one that was in play this week was GME. And I think since CVNA had that big squeeze out on earnings, I think we've started to see a couple more of like the old meme style or squeeze names just be a little bit more active in this market. And so GME was a great mover this week. And there's a couple of takeaways, and we'll go over it later on in the main watches as well. But just a few things to really notice is that look at those trend lines and the channels. And so if you look at this move on, as it's kind of winding up, you'll see the volume come in, the best volume that's happened in the last couple of months. And it feels like someone's in there. And I noticed that a lot of times when these kind of retail or these old retail crowded names pop, a lot of times they drop shortly after. The volumes, it can't really be sustained. But when you have a move where the volume can be sustained and you have abnormal volume for several days, that's a key tell for me that either someone's in there, maybe a fund is in there being active, or it's something a little bit more than just some retail people chasing it. And so this had some excellent range as it kind of ramped up, flushed down, and people were shorting this, longing this, and as long as you were kind of taking your profits along the way, you could have done fairly well on it, and that's a good sign. But check out this trend line down here. So if you see kind of the a little bit of a bigger picture view, you have these like large trend points or these equilibrium points where things flush down and it's just still kind of connecting the dots and trending higher. And you can see as those names or as those points kind of keep moving up, that is really what to watch for a trend change on the downside. And then if you look at the upside, you can see a very clear established level around that 1725 mark or so, where it just kept on testing and testing multiple times. And a lot of times when you have a good breakout, you'll have a level that gets tested many times, and eventually whoever's the seller there just gets worn out. And that's something that Nate and I have talked about in the past, where let's say you have 10 million shares of inventory kind of at a level. Every time it bumps up, it might knock out a little bit of that inventory until there's not much left on the offer. And if you still have that demand and that volume coming in, then you can still have that nice move on the upside. And then once it has, a big blowout move, and then longs get excited, shorts get blown out, and they get hands off, that's really when you can start to have some unwind. And again, whether you're long, short, options, equity, you can have some good opportunities on a name like this that was in play. CVNA, again, this is something that I think is almost like a leader in the squeeze, the earnings gap up market. And I think a lot of other names kind of saw this, or in sympathy to this, they're starting to have some moves as well. So we've had this on watch for a while, and you can see just this channel that it's really in. And until it breaks out of this channel, I assume that it will just kind of bounce off the edges. And I think that that's worth mentioning, because when you have a name that's in a channel, by definition, kind of the best way to play that a lot of the times is to fade the edges of the channel. Because if you're assuming that it's going to be in those edges, then the best risk to reward place to be for a counter move is on those edges. And then once you see, if it happens in the near future, once you see the price start to either base above this channel or base below it, that's when you can start to look at this as a more trend name to join again, as opposed to fading the edges. Then you can then use that edge of the previous channel as it's breaking out as a retest level, and that can be a guide. So CVNA was another one in play this week. UPST gap down on earnings, kind of no surprise, but this name has struggled over the last year. And you've seen a lot of these earnings plays where they either have disappointing guidance, disappointing numbers, just some reason for people who have either been in it or trading it or holding it to dump all at once. And whether it actually stays down or whether it soaks back up, a lot of that can be based on the current market conditions. So you have the initial reaction, and then a lot of times the current market will tell you kind of what's happening from that point. And we really saw several of those earnings names gap down and either kind of drift back up or gap down and just kind of stall out. And so there were names like RBLX, big gap down on earnings and bounced a little bit and then drifted. You also had ARM, another gap down on earnings, and then this one drifted back up. And that was kind of with the AI, the chip theme, and you had some names like NVIDIA, and a few others that like TSM that were really still showing some strength this week. So the sector is still in play, the theme is still going, but again, it's just kind of separating what names are relatively strong versus relatively weak. And ARM actually had a large move down from a previous channel from a couple of months ago. And so you can see, just like with CVNA, you have something that's in a channel for a while, and then once it starts to break out of that channel, you can then use the bottom edge of that channel kind of as a risk for either puts or if you're shorting equity, and that can be a good guide for some of those moves down. So again, many different styles of traders can capitalize on some of these moves, whether it's someone trading it on the downside once it breaks through a channel, or someone who's waiting for a bottom bounce or a reversal, kind of a mean reversion strategy. Whereas if you look in here, you can see the left side of the V, the right side of the V, the capitulation on the downside, and all those familiar concepts that we are used to talking about. And so that was another opportunity in there. And then with the most recent earnings gap, you kind of have it going back into some kind of a channel. And so we'll see what happens next with it. Palantir, same story, gap down on earnings. They had some weaker guidance. And so again, any reason for people who have been looking to sell a name, weaker guidance, especially in this market, has been a good reason for people to do that. And unlike some of the other names where they flush down on earnings and then they start to ramp back up, this has actually stayed pretty heavy. And so maybe it finds some equilibrium kind of back to where it was hanging out at over the last couple of months. And we have that 20 level, and that might be something that holds it in the near future. Shop was another name, same story, earnings gap down, had a bit of a bear flag, and then ramped down again. And so that's actually a good comparison if you take something like Shop, which they had margin compression and some weaker earnings. If you compare that with something like ARM, and you can see that they both have the big flush after earnings, but you can tell a lot about the sector, about the demand, about the current market by what happens after that, and just really having a plan for either scenario. Uber, same theme. You had a big flush down, and now it's kind of at that midpoint where it's starting to rally back up, but it hasn't quite picked a direction yet. And so you can see some of these dip points right here, or some of these points that we're catching, if that starts to break down again, then you could have a situation where it turns into like a longer time frame bear flag and it starts to break down again. Or if these hold and starts to break new highs, then you could have a move like ARM where it starts to rally back up again. And then Rivian, same thing, terrible earnings, or at least not great earnings. And I know that they had some potential partnership news, I believe, with Apple that was rumored to be coming out. So that will be on watch for the next couple of weeks or months. But you have that same kind of earnings reaction where kind of gaps down and then it's back at that midpoint, and then that's really where it can either fail to follow through and head back down, or it can start to base and ramp back up. Now, in the small cap realm, you had a couple of names like NVAX that had a really nice gap up on some news this week, and this was on Friday. And you can just see that the small caps are alive and well, and the range is wild. And so something like NVAX, that's been dead for a long time, very little volume, just a solid downtrend for, a long time. And then you have something like this come out of the blue, some kind of news, and it can really spike it up. And that's all the, we're familiar with this, where whether if someone's a short seller, they have to wait for the news to kind of settle down, get some buyers on the wrong side, and then wait for that failed follow through setup, make sure that you have a level to risk off of, and then you could try for the downside. But also in a market like this, breaking news trades can be really good, especially when the rest of the market can be a little bit lower volume coming into the summer. So when you have a piece of strong news, you can really, look at this equilibrium point. We talked about this with CGC last week, where if you have something that has just kind of been left for dead and you have a strong equilibrium point and it has some positive news, you can use this as kind of your guide, to either hammer in long on equity or to, play it however you're comfortable with it. But that's a good base to really risk off of. And then, your upside can be quite significant, especially if you have something that has some short interest in it, something that has some volume come in for the first time in a long time. And then we'll see over the next couple of days if this really, starts to trend back down, or if we get some kind of liquidity trap situation where, the volume, spikes, the stock spikes, it comes back in about halfway or 30 to 50% retrace, goes sideways, and then it might ramp back up if there's some shorts in there. And then with Mullen, they also had some news over the past week. And again, a name that's been in play in small caps for a very long time. And I believe that one of their subsidiaries had some kind of agreement, but they were back in play. You can see the volume come in, and it's still maintaining kind of those larger picture points that are holding on the downside. So we'll see if it starts to stuff against this level and maybe break that trend and head back down for failed follow through, or if it starts to maintain these dips, hold, and then do a blowout at a later time. And then NUWE, this had earnings. Again, another catalyst, had some volume come in, and this one was also in play. And there's not always there's so many different styles that not every ticker that I'm talking about is something that you could potentially had a trade on. But I do want to highlight what were the things that were in play, because if this is something that resonates with you or something that resonates with your style, I want to be able to make sure that people are getting good ideas and they can just see what's been happening in the market and then take what their style necessitates or what their style is good for and just draw it out of there. Because we just have so many different types of traders in Investors Underground. It's very nice to be able to branch out and kind of see what's happening in the market and then just really tailor it, any scans or people, and just to make it your own. And then finally, we had CGC, which almost had a round trip. And we talked about this last week. You had that breaking news kind of trade, big failed follow through overnight, clean downtrend, and then it just slowly heads back to that longer term equilibrium point. So those are a couple of names and things that were in play this week. I hope that you guys enjoy that section. Let me know in the comments if you want me to keep doing something like this, or we can, change it up. We can incorporate whatever you guys want. This scan is for you and to add value, and that's what we're trying to do with this. And so moving on to the next section of scan, we are going to get into the t-shirt winners. And so the t-shirt winners who left comments last week, the Shadow 850, and then Paul Eastlack 9794. Congratulations. You have won a t-shirt, and you can email webmaster@investorsunderground.com. And now I'm about to bring Judah on, and we can go over our main watches for the week. And so before I do that, I want to give a disclaimer that neither I nor Judah are financial advisors, and these are not buy or sell recommendations. This is for informational and educational purposes only. Judah is joining me for Watch this upcoming week. We have a lot of good things to talk about. So Judah, thanks for coming on Scan, and I'm excited to talk about everything you got.
Of course, thanks for having me on this week.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, busy week in the markets for all of us. I know you have several watches, so let's get right into it. What are you watching for this week, and what do you got?
So SRTS, this was a gapper today off of this press release and earnings that it's had. The earnings was pretty decent. I believe both the earnings per share and revenue growth was around 200%. And we basically had this morning spike. We gap up first of all, then we had this 7 a.m. spike, came back down, built these higher lows, and then we had this end of day kind of or afternoon rally back, and now we've held on to VWAP pretty well. This 5-4 area seems to be the key, and if you look on the daily, we also have this level looking left. But if we zoom out, we see how many times this thing has gapped down. We have this big gap down here, 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 here. I think that if we could build over that 530, 540 level, we could potentially get some legs up. So the first one on watch would be this one for a continuation. And then we have Reddit, which came out of or had earnings here and pretty much sold off the last 2 days. But you could see like it's soaking a little bit, and we get this soak here, pretty much at like the support and the 10-day, and then we get this pushback, and this 55 level seems to be key. This setup right now is kind of reminding me of ARM back here. You know how like it tests this level also around the same 55 level. It even has like the same range, the same push. It comes back down, and it tries to retest that level. So we're kind of at this level here with it. Either we fall back down to like 50 or 52, come back up and then break through, or we just push right through. So I mean, that's pretty much what it's kind of reminding me of that IPO that's starting to give this little base, and then has that resistance around 55, 56, and then push through for continuation. Crocs is another one that I was looking at the weekly chart here. It's just been slowly building these like higher lows, and it had earnings. It had earnings on the 7th, and it's just basically slowly grinding higher back into this key 145 level. So this I'll probably, this is more bigger picture, but I'll be looking for something there for potential continuation. I think they're doing really good things, and I mean, I think this could end up going a bit higher. NVIDIA is one that really just holding up very nicely. Obviously, the strongest AI and semi name here, and as long as it could pretty much build over this this like 210, 215 area, I still think like we get that 950,000 plus push. So that's the other one that I'm watching for a little bit more of a bigger picture. And then JAGX is one that just I mean, it keeps building and then consolidating and building, consolidating. I think that, if we continue to build a little bit or break over that 30 level, we could probably get another leg higher. We've seen this recently of those like small cap 15, 10 cent names that have push, built, and they end up going like, another 50 to 100% higher. So if we could continue to build, this could potentially be that next one that does that, 50 to 100% move. And that's pretty much what I have on watch. This like type of market, we've been having tons of morning gappers, and those gappers are pretty much off like earnings and news. And there's been tons of range off those names, and a lot of them just, happen to come in pre-market. But as of a watch list that I could prepare for, this is what I've got.
Excellent. Yeah. And that chart that you had up of RDDT, I think we were talking about that a couple of weeks ago because we
Yeah.
were also watching DJT. And that's what it reminded me of when DJT had that kind of V shape, that sell off. And then we were looking for changes in the price action, changes in the chart levels, changes in the volume. And you can draw trend lines like on the left side of that V, you can draw a trend line, basically on the top part of it, showing like what it's staying under. And then when it starts to turn, I usually draw a trend line underneath the right side of that V. And that really helps me to stay on track. So these setups, they happen frequently. And especially when you have things that are running kind of together, because both Reddit and DJT were, both taking on like their new names and IPOs around the same time. So that's definitely what it reminded me of. And you can get some really great range if you're watching those, as they slide down for, weeks at a time or days at a time. And then when they finally turn, they can go. And I think part of the reason for that, especially with the IPO or like the new to market names, is that initially you'll have, a certain amount of people, whether it's insiders or, people who were buying it just for the IPO kind of breakout. And once you kind of clear all those people out, a lot of times you'll have, that ramp come back up because there's not many sellers left in it that are able to sell. It's like the people who initially bought it are out, they got shaken out, they're bagged. A lot of the insiders aren't able to sell. And so if they're not selling and if there's not a lot of like natural sellers in there, if you have any demand come into these, that's how you can get these really nice, V shapes that trend for weeks at a time. And that's happened with both Reddit and DJT.
Yeah, and what's very positive about this is that it's pretty much recovering that earnings gap sell-off. So, it's exchanging hands here, and now that we're coming back up, I mean, there's a pretty good chance that we do pierce that 55 and head higher.
Yeah, and then maybe eventually some kind of blow-off move. Great.
Yeah.
And then you also had NVIDIA on watch. That's a watch for myself as well. As always, I'm trying to find things that are, what's like the theme that is in play, and then what's the strongest names within that theme. And so it's just really like relative strength on top of relative strength. And NVIDIA was an interesting one this week, and I think it actually would have gone higher, but there was news that Stanley Druckenmiller, who was a big investor, he's a big investor in general, but he's been in NVIDIA since 150. He got in, I think, last year or a little bit further back, but he just sold a good part of his position at around 900 from 150. And so, part of that is just you had an incredible move, incredible company and trade play out. And so taking profits on that. But he also had some comments about the AI sector getting overextended and everything. So I think that held NVIDIA back a little bit this week, just that news, and it kept it around that 900 level. But I think that if that news had not come out, that NVIDIA would still be chugging up towards earnings later on this month. And then in addition to that, GME, that was an interesting one over the week. And I feel like over the last year or two, whenever we've had these kind of old retail names get catch a bid, they've really just like popped and then they've just faded off, and you could just tell that there's no substance to the rally. This one felt a little bit different to me, and it almost felt like there was either news coming or like there's a fund or someone's kind of in there with some old retail people. But this has had a really nice move, and then you could see it consolidated over the last couple of days, and then on Friday it had a nice kind of continuation and breakout. And there was just kind of two ideas that I wanted to touch on with a situation like this. And one of them is to not, if you're looking for downside, don't try it too early. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the option activity. A lot of times with these names, there's heavy call option buying. And so just like NVIDIA or SMCI back in the day, waiting until a Friday, you can usually have a more vulnerable setup for some downside after a pop, as opposed to earlier on the week. And then another thing to keep in mind is if you have a chart that looks good and a lot of people are on the same page of like, this is a nice breakout, this is lining up and everything, as you get more and more kind of longs in there for the ride, that's something to take note of, even if you're bullish on it. Because as soon as it starts to tick down or as soon as something breaks or the bid gets pulled, you have all those people that were looking to trend it on the upside that they're going to start bailing. And so that's like another way that you can prepare for an eventual move on the downside if that's how you choose to trade. And so whether you're trading it long or short, there's definitely opportunities there. But those are just a couple of things that came to mind for me. And then the next name that I had on watch was TSM. And much like NVIDIA, just sticking with the AI, the chip theme, this has definitely had some real relative strength over the last couple of weeks. And so if it's continuing to act strong, if the theme is still in play and the market's still relatively bullish, then that's definitely a name that I would be looking to either purchase calls on if they line up, or potentially a long equity position on that. And then I had another one, I believe it was REBN. Do I have that right? Yeah, yep. REBM. And so this was a nice small cap name that ramped up, and it's really setting up for that liquidity trap that we talked about. If we could just zoom in a little bit more to see a more granular view of it. So this is that liquidity trap that we talk about. You can really start to build a watch list for some of these names by just keeping track of what have been very high volume names, parabolic runners over the last week or two. And so, you might have a lot of these names that really just ramp up. They have news, a headline, they have huge volume come in, and then they kind of just fade all the way back down. But if you're aware of the ones that ramp up and then they just kind of consolidate and the volume dries up, those are the ones that I have on watch for potential liquidity traps. And basically what happens is that if they hang around and they start to tick back up, the thought process is that you have some shorts in there who are, basing their position sizing on the large volume. And as that volume just dries up to nothing and those shorts are still in there, eventually they have to get out. And when they start to cover, that can move the price up and result in a secondary squeeze. And you can get some really good range on that. So that was definitely a name that I had on watch there. And that was it for me for the most part, unless there's one more name on that list that I'm missing.
Tesla, I believe.
Oh, yeah, and Tesla. So this was a name that, we had been watching on the downside for a long time. It finally hit, that 150 level, and then it had earnings, gapped up, and it was consolidating. And it was, I was waiting for it to see if it was going to reset and start a new trend higher, or if it was just going to eventually settle back into its trend. And I think we're right on the point where it's deciding what it wants to do, because it is starting to fade back down a little bit. And there's news about Elon and his compensation package and things like that coming up, and they still have the rest of the struggles with the business. But I do think that it's a little bit different than it was before. Just with that big gap up, you have a little bit of a tape reset. But this is on watch for potential weakness, maybe with puts, or possibly, someone could play this with equity as well if the market starts to get weak. So that's basically what I had on watch. Judah, you had some great things on watch as well. And I feel like over the last few weeks, the market's recovered well. And I think that some of the volume has dried up a little bit as we get into the summer trading. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, I guess, over the past week that the volume has been below average. But I mean, we've saved. I mean, down here, I mean, we it was a beautiful save even on these days here, and we've just been putting in higher lows, and I mean, we're trending higher. If you look, I mean, we do run into this key area here. It's possible, we pull back for a few days into next week, and then we end up higher. But yeah, we're getting into those key levels, and I mean, this here was a pretty impressive save, especially given that volume to the downside we've been having, and we're pretty much right back to where it sold off. So, yeah, I mean, taking it day by day, but yeah, things are looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, definitely. And the variables that we kind of laid out a few weeks ago with the high VIX environment, the Middle East conflicts, you had bond yields, you had the Fed talk, you had all these things that kind of leveled out, at least, in market terms. And, the VIX is back down towards 13 or so. And it's just a very different environment than it was a couple of weeks ago. So that's nice to see that the market is, still in an overall uptrend. And I'm sure that it'll continue over the next couple of weeks or couple of months, unless we have something interfere with that. Okay, so Judah, thank you for coming on this week. Those were great watches. And then just a reminder to everyone to like and subscribe in the comments. And the t-shirt winners, those names will be in the description of this. So Judah, have a great week. And I hope that everyone else has a great week as well.
You too. Thank you.